Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. This is episode 115, and we're joined by a first-time guest. His name is Jason Call. He is actually the campaign manager, the current campaign manager for the Jill Stein 2024 campaign, the presidential campaign representing the Green Party. He himself is also running for public office. He's running for the U.S. House Congressional District, the second one in the state of Washington, and he's already been endorsed by that state's Green Party, and we're going to talk about him because we've never met him before. So we want to get to know Mr. Call, kind of how he got from this point, being the campaign manager for Jill Stein, running for Congress himself, and just, what does he do outside of that? What has been his political journey, which is quite interesting looking at his biographical information. We'll talk about that in a second. But I just want to say thanks for accepting the invitation and welcome to the show.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking with you.
100%. Thank you so much again for graciously accepting that invitation. That means a lot because it shows that there's a lot of enthusiasm. People do want to make a change in the world. And here we are, definitely a social advocacy platform here. I'd like to market it as culture, politics, have culture, have politics. The culture part, a lot of that coming from my professional development, being a Spanish professor. And so I think it's really important for us to have global perspectives. And exemplified by the support of the channel. We have about 43% of our audience supports the channel outside of the United States, lives outside of the United States. That was always the point, making an international community forum, global, national, local perspectives, blend those together. I think that's also a blind spot when we talk about the political realm. A lot of politicians don't really address things outside of their boundaries. And we try to do the opposite here. We really try to emphasize the geopolitical aspect of things. And I'm sure that we will get into that some today, but also support independent media, support independent candidates outside of the RD team. That's the way we see it here. We see it as Dempublican, Republican, whatever you want to call them. Support people, even if you've never done it before, consider giving a third party independent candidate a look, give them a second look. Even if you never considered it, give them a second look at that platform and see what you like on there and compare it to your own principles. That's the way I like to tell people. Support independent media. It doesn't cost you a dime to support our channel here, Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. We don't have any sort of paywall structure. We don't plan on ever having a paywall structure. So give us a click for free. You have a tendency to do that to some of the bigger accounts that you follow. So give independent media a little bit less skepticism and a little bit more optimism, and give us a support too as well. Let's get started with Mr. Call, and just kind of tell us, as long as you like, take as much time as you want to, what has been kind of your journey before you got into politics? I don't know, have you always been a politically active person?
As an adult, I have. It's interesting that you mentioned a lot of your viewing audience is international, and that's probably a decent place to start because I actually grew up in England. I was born in the United States, but my father was United States Air Force, and I grew up in England until I was 11 years old. So, I kind of had my formative educational years at a very young age, and it was interesting when I moved to America. That a lot of the stuff, because I think people overseas would understand this, like you start school at a couple of years earlier in other countries, and so I started my preschool, or actual educational school, is like the age of 3. So by the time I moved over here, when I was 11 years old, I'd already had 8 years of school, and I went into 7th grade and signed up for an algebra class, which most people take in 9th grade here in America, algebra 1. Only I had done all of that stuff 2 years ago. So, even as 7th grade, I was just like, oh, we've already done all of this stuff. And then, I ended up being a math teacher for almost 20 years. So it kind of worked out nicely. But no, I think the geopolitical aspect of American politics, we do tend to be very sort of isolated, and have a thinking about this country, American exceptionalism, where we often really disregard our impact. And I don't think anybody would argue that America is, the most wealthy and powerful and influential nation on the planet right now, but often to a level of real disregard for our impact on the world, in terms of consumption of resources, how we influence the way other countries do their politics. Um, I think a lot of Americans really don't have that kind of understanding. They're very sort of America, we're number one. Although I don't know how many people think that anymore, but I remember growing up in the 80s where it was very much of an American exceptionalism and, a lot of patriotic fervor. That all came back during the Iraq War, where George Bush really sort of harnessed this rah rah, we're number one, and then we all, well, those of us who protested against it didn't, but I think there was a lot of feeling in the country that, you've got to be on our side. George Bush said it, you're with us or you're with the terrorists, which is a very binary mindset, and actually really very representative of how American politics is done. You're either with us or you're with the enemy, where the nuance of politics is actually much more complex than that. My political journey, I'd say I've lived in Washington State. When we moved from England, we moved to, we did a little bit of traveling around the country. I had grandparents in Florida, great grandparents in Texas, other grandparents in California. And then we stayed in Oregon a little bit. We thought maybe we were going to move to Oregon, but we ended up in Washington State, and I've basically been a Washington State native since, 1983. So I'm over 40 years in state, barring a couple of years that I lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and barring a brief stint that I did in Cairo, Egypt, where I was a math teacher. I went to do some international teaching. And part of the reason that I ended up in Cairo was that I was so, I guess, upset, disappointed, disgusted that we had reelected George Bush that I literally made good on my promise that, this guy gets reelected, I'm out of here. And he did, and I went. So, did come back though. My political journey really started when I was a freshman, sort of freshman, sophomore, like I think that summer between my freshman and sophomore year at the University of Washington, um, where we had started to engage Saddam Hussein the first time with the Desert Storm War. And, I'm a musician. I was playing the bass guitar in a punk band in Seattle, if you can imagine, in 1989, 1990. I'm engaged in the music scene, the underground punk music scene in Seattle, as Nirvana and Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains. Those kind of bands are sort of on the rise. I was never part of that. We in the band, you're like, we're gonna make it, we're gonna make it. So we didn't make it, but we had a lot of fun playing in the scene and playing in those same circles. But the punk mindset, just sort of the musician, is very anti-authoritarian and anti-imperialism. And so I engaged with my punk compadres in protesting the Desert Storm War, on the steps of the federal building in Seattle. And, I don't want to say we clashed with police because it wasn't a very clashy protest, but we camped out and we protested and we made our presence known. Um, and so from then on, I really considered myself, like this is back in 1990. From then on, I really considered myself a left-wing activist. I didn't get involved in organized left-wing politics until probably, and I say left wing like very loosely because I don't really consider the Democratic Party left wing. Although the media tends to say the Democrats are left wing, but in terms of like protest activism all through the 90s, while I voted for Bill Clinton the first time around in 1992 because it was the alternate to George W. Bush, no, George H.W. Bush, right? Bush won. I did not vote for Clinton the second time around. I kind of saw the Clinton style politics, that was, by the end of his term, Glass-Steagall had been overturned, and I voted for Ralph Nader in '96, and then bombing of aspirin factories in Sudan. I was watching all that stuff, and then there was the war in Bosnia, right? More military engagements that, when I voted for Clinton in '92, I expected change in direction of politics, and there really wasn't one. And so I voted for Ralph Nader in 1996, and I voted for Ralph Nader in 2000. Not as an organized member of the Green Party, but just because, I consider myself left wing and anti-establishment and wasn't interested in corporate duopoly politics. And the only reason that I re-entered, um, kind of getting organized with the Democratic Party, and I would have considered myself a Democrat, although like reluctantly, like a reluctant Democrat for 20 years, is because of George W. Bush and because of our engagement in Iraq. Um, so, it was the hope that we could unseat George Bush in 2004. Then the hope and change, because I was very taken in by Barack Obama, um, and really felt like he had the capacity to make some real change in this country. Of course, by the end of his term, you realize, man, this is the same old, same old. Um, and then I got into the Bernie Sanders movement. And I was a very active organizer for Bernie in 2016. In fact, Washington State won in the caucus in 2016. We won every county in Washington. And so we won the entire state for Bernie here. And of course, then you see the Democratic Party with their superdelegates. All of their superdelegates went to Hillary, and so you get more disenchanted with the system. I had even gotten myself elected to the Washington State Democrat Central Committee, which is the governing body of Democrats within the state. And I saw how the state Democratic Party was simply an arm of the DNC, so there's no real independence there. In fact, the caucus system, which really kind of lends itself to activism, because around the country, Bernie won every caucus, which requires people to actually go, be passionate about a candidate, argue for their candidate, show up, convince people that their candidate is the best, which a primary system does not do. Primary is just like cast your vote. There's no debate. But a caucus system involves a lot of debate. So around the country, Bernie, I think there are like 12, 13 states that had caucuses and not primaries. And Bernie won all of them. Utah, Idaho, Alaska, West Virginia. So what we saw the DNC do here in Washington State was basically tell us, you're going to switch from a caucus to a primary. We had a big old battle between the Hillary people and the Bernie people on the state committee, because we were like, no, we want to retain the caucus system. And they said, well, it's exclusionary, and people can't show up on a Saturday and argue for their candidate, and it leaves a lot of people out. And they switched to a primary system. And even in 2020, Bernie still won. He didn't win the primary. It was about a 50-50 in Washington with the primary in 2020. But I saw how the Democratic Party operated, like at the highest levels within the state, and they took their marching order from the DNC, even ran for state party chair in 2018, but with an argument of, we have got to get off of fossil fuel. We got to stop taking this corporate money. We got to actually act on behalf of the people. And then realized the Democrats were just not going to do that. So I ended up not seeking re-election to the state committee in 2020, but I did decide, because some people reached out to me and said, you're the person to do this. If anybody is going to take on this guy who we've got in our district here, you're the person to do it. And then the political calculation was, well, if I take on this guy, by name of Rick Larson, who is the incumbent still in Washington's 2nd District, the only way I'm really going to do that in terms of maximizing political potential is to do it as a Democrat. So as I ran as a Democrat in 2020, ran as a Democrat in 2022, and now in 2024, I'm running as a Green Party member, because after the 2022 election, first of all, I said I wasn't going to run this race again, but the Green Party reached out to me and they said, we think you should. You did really well, got over 30,000 votes both times, and came very, very close. So Washington State has a top 2 primary system, and if you're in California, you know what that is. But basically, a bunch of candidates file for a seat, and the top 2 vote getters move on to the general. Well, I came in 3rd place twice, and a very close 3rd place twice. So over 30,000 votes each time, built up a lot of name recognition. The people on the left trust me as a candidate, but I said I was not going to do it as a Democrat. So the Green Party stepped in and said, will you run as a Green? I said, if you can raise the filing fee for it, which is about $1,740, And they raised the filing fee within 3 weeks. And I said, there we go. I'm running as a Green. And so that brings me to where I am now. And, I'm officially a Green Party member as of February of 2023, completely abandon the Democrats, completely reject corporate duopoly politics. I'm an open socialist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and I'm running against one of the worst Democrats he's the worst Democrat in Washington State, but one of the worst Democrats in the entire House. So that's where I am right now.
Wow. So you covered a lot of information,
Threw a lot of stuff at you there.
but that's great. And it's really cool because I did ask you, it was an open-ended question about the political journey, and you mentioned just our involvement in Bosnia. Just that stuff seems like, and I'm going to try to get this person on the show, Mark Crispin Miller, because I feel like,
I love Mark Crispin Miller. I've got
Mhm.
his books. I've met him before. His book, I forget what it is, but I got it signed. It's one of the best books I ever read about how, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but
No, no,
you
you're
know,
good.
I'm absolutely fantastically enthusiastic about Mark Crispin Miller. I've got a number of his books, but I forget what the one was, but it was about the Bush administration. He wrote it back
Oh
in like
gosh, I should know it because
2006.
that's the one I'm going to reach out to him about.
Yeah, I know
Bothers
what
me.
you're talking about, but I got a signed copy of it. So that's how much I love Mark Crispin Miller.
Yes, that's a very important overlooked time period. I feel now it's almost like they've rehabilitated Bush's his image and everything, because I know people talk so much about Trump and all this and just the conservatives in general, but I remember a time when the anti-war movement was pretty high in the country. I remember I was at Middle Tennessee State University as a freshman, sophomore during that period of time when we were protesting on campus, even so it seems like it was a long time ago, but it wasn't. But I believe how the system kind of effectively gets people to rope them back into the whatever camp it is basically it's a generational. They use this generational shift strategy. I can't really put my finger on it, but I guess they figure, well, if these people live 10 more years or whatever, they're not going to have the same views anyway. So if we keep doing what we're doing, everyone else is just going to catch up to what we're doing. And it seems like that's what the system does, unfortunately. You alluded to a lot of the issues with the two-party system just in your bio. And my question for you, you already made a reference to it about the 2023, you left the Democratic Party. Um, why last year did you feel like it was the year to just finally leave the Democratic Party officially?
Well, I mean, I think mentally I checked out of the Democratic Party after the second Bernie election. So, I ran as a Democrat for this seat 2020, 2022 with a political calculation that running as a Democrat was a more strategic thing to do, just because the Democrats are known, and the Green Party or any other independent left. And when honestly, I had people telling me all the time, you should not run as a Democrat, you should run as an independent, you should run as a socialist, you should run as this. So you get a lot of advice from people. But I think my team and I really felt like the calculation was, if we can leverage what we think are progressive elements within the Democratic Party, we can make an impact. So, I would say I didn't really consider myself a Democrat, and running for office within the Democratic Party, I'm running around the district, engaging with all these local Democratic parties, trying to get their endorsement. And so I did sway some people to my side. I did get some good endorsements within the Democratic Party, but it's still a massive money machine. And, the people who have been there, kind of the stalwarts who have been there for a long time, they're like, why would this, why do you should be fighting Republicans. You shouldn't be, like, they look at challenging a Democrat from within. It's really a broken mindset. But challenging a Democrat from within is really like, why would you do that? You should go fight Republicans. Our job is to fight Republicans, not to fight each other. And I kept telling them, but this guy, Rick Larson, look at his track record. I mean, anytime somebody breaks with the Republic, anytime there's a small handful of Democrats that break with the Democratic Party and go vote with the Republicans to pass some heinous stuff, he's part of that group. I mean, he's fully funded by the war machine and the military industrial complex and lobbyists. And, he gets 2/3 of his funding from PACs. And my argument was like, couldn't we do better than this? Couldn't we have better representation? And then they're like, well, he's been there a long time and he has, when you're there for a long time, you get status and he'll bring a lot of money to the district and, he has clout and whatever. And I'm like, if that's all you're interested in, if you're not really interested in making a real change for the majority of people, then, this is it's fraud. And you want to consider, you like, as Democrats, you want to consider yourself a progressive party, but you're making the word progressive mean nothing at all, because you're absolutely fine with keeping reelecting this basically a corporate stooge who is never going to vote. He's already said he'll never vote for Medicare for all. He won't support the Green New Deal. I mean, he says these things out loud. And these rank and file Democrats are more concerned with, well, we can't lose this seat to a Republican, so we know that Rick Larsen can win. And I said, what you're telling me here is, like, if I was on the ballot next to a Republican, you wouldn't vote for me. Like, I couldn't beat a Republican in this district. This is a heavily Democratic district. Don't we deserve better? And so when I saw that, like I said, I'd mentally checked out of the organization of the Democratic Party in 2020, but still trying to convince Democrats that they can do better than what they have. So it wasn't just like last year, but as I said, I was not going to run this race again. But because I had people reach out to me and say I should, that I'd made enough of an impact, that they really feel I could win the seat if I tried it again, I basically said, well, I'm not doing this as a Democrat. I'm done after 2 runs within the Democratic Party. I'm not going to go through that process again. I don't want to talk to those people anymore. I find a lot of them just highly offensive, disingenuous, not great people, and think that they are, in their protection of the Democratic Party. Well, we're good Democrats. And I'm like, but the Democratic Party is not good. So what does that even mean? So, I've been out, and even going back earlier in my activist career, like I said, in the 96 and 2000, I voted for Ralph Nader. So I always considered myself a Democrat by default, like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like, if I got to pick between the two, I'm certainly not going to pick the Republican Party. And maybe I can make a difference with the Democrats, but always just a very reluctant Democrat. And now completely free to be who I am and not try and run this race kowtowing to local Democratic officials, or because they're not going to endorse me. They were never going to endorse me. They all line up behind the incumbent because they're all, they do this as a career. They're like, oh, if I don't line up behind Rick Larsen, he's gonna, even though, like, we've got some good housing advocates, good healthcare advocates, good climate advocates here in Washington State, they're not going to speak out against a 12-term incumbent because it's a power structure, right? It's a power structure. And, like, they know that the likelihood of me winning is not as great as the incumbent. And that's all fair. That's all good. I get that. But they're not going to, like, tip the scales and have that blowback come at them. There's a lot of, I guess it's cowardice, but maybe not even cowardice, maybe just their own political careerist calculations, and if that's what they want to do, then that's fine, but that's kind of the way it is.
I made a comment on social media, and I had to be so careful on social media. On X, I hardly ever post. Like, if I'm posting something, it's just video content from the channel. It's not like any kind of a comment or a statement for myself. But on Facebook, I was compelled to make a comment. There was a thread that was starting, and I interviewed Tracy Carson. She's a really good friend of mine. She has a
I
show
know
called.
Tracy. I've done a show with her a couple
Okay,
of
you
years ago.
have? Okay,
Yeah,
awesome. I have
about
to go
3
check
years
the
ago.
interview out. I have to
Yeah.
check it out. But we were talking, and it's just this same logic that people use. We just don't want to see a monstrosity of Trump again. But then if you see the justification behind why they say this stuff about keeping the Republicans out, they say stuff like, I'm not even making this stuff up yesterday. Someone said, we really have to maintain the status quo. And I said to myself, do you realize that that's why people are leaving the Democratic Party? You're saying it yourself. People won't change. They don't want the same stuff. You keep using this other entity as like a way for people to stay in. That's not what people want. The people are telling you, I'm sick of it. I don't care about this. We've already had that before. We've already experienced that. So it's not going to scare people the same way. And then on top of that is just this the voter shaming is already starting, like,
Oh, yeah.
because we're in such an active period. And I believe your election for your particular house run is November the 5th, right? I think that's the
Well, that's the
federal election.
federal election. My primary is August 6th. My primary is
August
the
6th.
first Tuesday in August. And you know, again, top two primary system. If I make it in on to second place, then I get to go head to head with the incumbent in the November election. And I believe I can win that race. If it's me and him, I believe I can win that race because I think this is a progressive district, and certainly no Republican will ever win this seat. So, you know, I'm hoping that me running as a green will appeal to young people. I'm also I'm making inroads to the Arab American, the Muslim American community here, because along with uncommitted all across the country, a lot of the Muslim American population is, you know, they're trying to decide: are we going to take this, abandon Biden? Are we going to take it all the way to November? And we're going to say, you know, but because I've heard some people say, yeah, we know Trump's at the other side of this. You know, we do. But that's how much we despise you right now for what's going on in the Middle East. And you're not going to change your policy. The Democratic Party is doing exactly the same that they have already done, is to say to those people, what are you going to do? Vote for Trump? You know, like, you're stuck with us. And it's so disrespectful to not address people's real issues. But they do that with the healthcare activist community. They do that with the climate activist community. Any progressive issue that is on the table that Democrats are saying, yeah, we might do something, where the Republicans are not going to do anything, that's their message. What are you going to do? Vote for. And I think we're at a point right now where people are realizing, you know, your inaction as a Democratic Party, right? You're just inaction. Like, they're talking about what passed in the infrastructure bill as, you know, they say, well, what's the most, we passed the most climate. This is what the incumbent that I'm running against does all the time. We passed the most climate spending ever. And the reality of it is, it's nowhere near what is needed to address the real problem of global warming and climate change. You know, I mean, we're going to obviously be heading into the hottest year on record again. And it's also 7%, like the spending they passed is 7% of the military budget, where the military is the largest, the US military is the largest non-state polluter on the planet. So all of this is just lip service. It's designed to distract or like paint a picture, you know, a veneer over, you know, what is just the other corporate party. We're the other corporate party of the war machine and Wall Street. So this idea that the Democrats are somehow better than the Republicans, I think it's fading away. Like, you guys are, you know, are you different? Yeah, you're not exactly the same, but are you different enough to save the future? No, you're not. You're really not. And I think people are waking up to that.
I really hope so, because this is at least a question I have for you. I honestly, this is my own personal assessment. I believe, I don't know if it's just the National Green Party, because I don't have really a Green Party that I can look at outside and be like, okay, that's my local Green Party office in Tennessee. Um, and I know there's a Green Party presence in Tennessee, but it's not like it is in other states. Of your state, for instance, I'll get to that question. But I asked Dr. Stein this question. Um, do you think that there's a perception that the Green Party is too close to the Democratic Party, to the point where it doesn't differentiate itself enough when it comes to when the voter is deciding, if I'm going to cast a vote, am I going to cast it for the Green Party or for the Democratic Party? Is like, are they too close enough to where those voters are just, they have this default option in their mind because they've been so programmed into the system? What's your view on that?
No, I would say not at all. I have always looked at the Green Party as being separate. They're an activist party. We're actually standing for, real. Like if you look at, I shouldn't say look at the Jill Stein platform because we're still developing it and it's mostly there and it'll be up on the website. We're going through a website transition right now, so like our full platform isn't available. But on the Green Party website, if you go to gp.org, you can read the Green Party's platform positions, and we are an eco-socialist party. We don't shy away from the word socialism. We believe and would work for a just economy, a just transition out of the fossil fuel industry, the private healthcare insurance industry. We have strong labor principles. Certainly, we have strong climate justice principles. We have strong diversity principles. Um, so I have never looked at the Green Party as being in any way associated with the Democratic Party. I think you've had a couple of prominent, like, Greens at one point where they realized, like, I think it was back in 2004. David, was it David Cobb, who in 2004, I'm trying to remember, had said, listen, we don't want George Bush to be reelected, so please
Mhm.
vote for George. I mean, we're in the middle of a war. And so there was that sort of political calculation, like, we would encourage Greens to vote for the Democrat in this particular instance. But that's a situational thing. And I think we're very far removed from that right now. And I certainly know that Jill Stein and me being her campaign manager, there's not a chance in hell we're going to turn around and say you should vote for Joe Biden. No, we want to build a strong left coalition. We want to work with all members of the left, whether it's the Party for Socialism and Liberation, who are running Claudia De La Cruz and Karina Garcia right now, whether it's the Cornel West campaign, whether it is, the Revolutionary Communist Party. When we talk about just a number of left groups that we hope we can pull together to make a real challenge to the establishment in 2024. And the reason it's important to do this, and the reason it is important to never say, go ahead and vote for Joe Biden, is we may not survive the future under the corporate duopoly. I mean, that's the reality of our climate literally sliding off a cliff. We have the housing crisis is still exploding. We have 30 million people who are uninsured, another 100 million people who are underinsured, can't, the healthcare system, which, when you think about what is the function of government, why does a government exist? Not in terms of a nanny state take care of people, but to ensure that the basic needs for human existence are met, that people have affordable housing, that they have affordable health care, that education is a human right. The fact that we have $2 trillion in debt can be directly attributed not only to Joe Biden and that bankruptcy bill, which was a Republican bill, but also the guy that I'm running against who voted for it as well. These things, we have lost this idea of what should be in place for the common good. And we've become very, I think since Reagan, we've become very gangster mentality in terms of it's every person for themselves. Um,
Mhm.
and we're perfectly willing to look at homeless encampments and say, oh, that is a personal failing of all of these people. These people shouldn't have gotten themselves on drugs. Well, half the people who are homeless right now are suffering PTSD and not being having their health care needs taken care of by the government who sent them to war. That's the reality of how ludicrous it is in this country, that we don't take care of people and we don't respect, like, all the people who are anti-abortion activists. Like, we've been saying this for decades, and you care about them when they're in the womb. As soon as they're born, you're like, hands off, you're on your own, kid. And we do that to young mothers, and we abandon people who are struggling with addiction, and the war on drugs is a massive failure, and we're still like I can't believe that it was October of what are we now? It was October of 2022, and it was heading into the 2022 midterm elections where Joe Biden started to say, hey, we need to look at rescheduling cannabis, and we're over a year and a half past that, and they haven't done anything at all. So the Democrats float these things where they're like, oh, look, we'll do something good if you put us in office. Like, we're
Mm.
waiting for you to take action right now. This idea that you can't cancel student debt. No, you can't, right? But who are you tied to? You're tied to the banking industry. So you don't want to cancel student debt. I mean, it's and then the other thing is the capitalists, like the corporate overlords of our political system, realize that when you have financially strained populations, that's a moneymaker also. Like, payday lending services are a massive grift. Credit card interest is a massive grift. We can jack up your rent. There's nothing you can do about it. It's a massive grift. Um, all of this stuff is sucking the labor value that the average American puts into the economy, and it's leaving them, financially strapped every month. And all of that money is going into shareholder profits and CEO salaries. And we're at a point where this bubble, if you want to call it that, is gonna burst, and we can have it burst gently, or we can really have, like, you know go to Paris in 1789. They decided they were not fucking around anymore, you know? And I feel like there's the potential here in this country. People are that stressed out right now.
Yes, definitely. And before I get into some of your campaign specific messages and stuff, you've already alluded to some of your positions. When you talk about the climate, jobs, the healthcare system is just in a shambles. The homelessness crisis, um, wages. As far as the Overton window is concerned, I had an interesting conversation yesterday with the independent candidate running for president, Gavin Bonner. He's actually based in the state of Oregon, and we talked a lot about the Overton window. And for me, the way the system has set this up, whether it's the mainstream media, commentators, talking heads, Wikipedia, Google, any of these things where there's just a quick fix, like, okay, let me just get somebody's opinion. They're legitimate because they have 3 million followers. They're all of a sudden legitimate, but not, testing those views, all just simply taking them at face value. Those groups that you mentioned earlier, um, the Green Party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a lot of the Revolutionary Communist Party, a lot of these groups are automatically lumped into far left, assuming that the Democrats are a left wing party, which is absolutely not a left wing party. The way I like to explain is that the Democrats are a corporate party, just like the Republican Party, regardless of the aesthetics and the identity politics differences here and there. And even then, I don't even know. I'm not 100% convinced that even in the identitarian politics realm, the Democrats are necessarily as progressive as they say they are, just based on the people that I know. But it's just, how do we get people to realize that fighting for healthcare for all isn't something that's super radical? I mean, in most countries that are more conservative minded, they have a healthcare system where everyone is protected. So why is it that here we see these ideas as just so far fetched? How do we respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you go back to, the 60s and the 70s, and a lot of a lot of the boomer crowd, who these days like to say, well, you took out a loan, you should pay it off. They were paying $1,000 a year to go to college. Like, college was essentially free back in the 60s and 70s. Healthcare was essentially, like, I don't think it was until about 1973 when healthcare started getting financialized. Labor unions were the strongest they ever were in the 50s and the 60s. There was a strong labor movement. So, I mean, I want to say that it was the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 that really kind of turned a corner. And I don't want to say that, while we had better things in this country, they were not good for everybody. They were good for middle class, white people. I get that. There was, racism was terrible, segregation, redlining. So when we say like these things were available, we know they weren't available to everybody, right? But, a lot of the people who argue, that Joe Biden comes from this mindset. I mean, as old as he is right now, he comes from this mindset of like, well, we paid off our debts back then, but you didn't really have any. You could buy a house and a car on a single income, and arguments about the nuclear family and whether that's the best model or anything, but you could exist and you could survive without having to do what people are doing today, which is, work 80 hours a week at gig jobs and, hope that you can make rent and not really have any prospects for having a family or ever owning your own property, or, it's like, I don't think the older generations, and it's not a blanket, because every time I say this, I get some of my boomer friends yell at me. No, we get it. We understand. Don't be divisive. This isn't an age thing. But in a lot of ways, it really is an age thing. It really, when you talk about like the demographics and the statistics, it very much is an age thing. So people are not having any opportunity to build any generational wealth. I just saw a story that the all of the billionaires, every billionaire in this country right now, it has inherited wealth. They're not self-made. They have inherited wealth. Like even, Bill Gates's father was like, how was Bill Gates able to earn his wealth? Well, his dad controlled a lot of the tech stuff at the University of Washington, and so he got access to the University of Washington's mainframe computers in the 70s, and could do all of the stuff that he wanted to do for development, computer development. And I'm not a tech guy, so I don't get into it, but I know he came from money. Jeff Bezos came from money. These are not self-made people. And so many people in this country have had no opportunity to build generational wealth and still don't, because everybody is strapped to the debt that is created by rising rents and education costs and food costs. Like, we looked at food costs have gone up 35% in the last however many years. I don't remember how many years, but not that many years. Food costs are rising. So we have to get to a system where the basics of what we would consider a reasonable lifestyle are not something that you need to work 80 hours a week to attain. And a lot of that really just has to go to the basics of housing and healthcare and education. That these things should be part of the public good, part of the public common. They should be accessible to everybody. Um, I don't even remember what your original question was, but
No, no, you addressed it about the Overton window. You addressed it about changing the perception of this, because admittedly, and I'm honestly, when it comes to electoral politics, I do bring on a lot of people to discuss it. But if people notice, I'm not going to say that I've never invited a Republican or a Democrat. They've just never been on the show. But everyone I've interviewed has been outside of that system. The electoral system has really frustrated me so much. And I think there are ways that you can make a change without voting. I don't think that voting is the just all in you is just going to save the world. I think there's other things that led to that. Like we talk about direct action. If it wasn't for the civil rights movement, those direct actions of the civil rights movement, you have to look at the two together. I mean, for you to have that voting process, I mean, you could argue that those protests and stuff had a lot to do with that, especially for the disenfranchised voters, the black people, whoever else was disenfranchised. So electoral politics is really it's a game for sure. Like there's such a binary mindset. You mentioned it earlier at the very beginning. There's just such a binary mindset, and people only see two options. It's like they can't look beyond the two options, and anything else outside of those options seem extreme. And I think you addressed it as far as like changing those perceptions.
Well, I mean, you got to remember, we also have a corporate media system that is in place to protect, like the people talk about the left-wing media like CNN and MSNBC,
Yeah,
that's left-wing media. I like, yeah, they are as left-wing as their corporate owners. Media is about advertising and it's about making profits, just like education now is about making profits, just like healthcare. I mean, and this is the thing that, going back to Reagan, right? What flipped with Reagan is the financialization of everything. It's the squeezing profit out of everything. And something that has impacted my district a lot is Boeing is the largest employer in my district. And the guy that I'm running against, we call him, the congressman from Boeing. Boeing is one of his largest contributors. He was also the chair of the aviation subcommittee of House Transportation. He's now the ranking member of House Transportation and so if people understood how this financialization actually impacts them, like it's not only driving your rent up, but it is behind the train derailment that happened in East Palestine and the cover up of the chemical spill and the fact that the residents of East Palestine can't get their water and their air tested anymore and can't get restitution from Norfolk Southern. That comes from the financialization of the railroad industry, where they said, we want to cut safety staff and we want to increase shareholder profits. Well, what do you do at that point? Now you're cutting, you're making your systems more or less safe. It's exactly what has happened with Boeing. It's when McDonnell Douglas and Boeing merged, right? The company went from one of the most respected companies in the entire world, like the gold standard for aircraft. It went to a company that is now going to cut corners, and this is literally what happened with Boeing Construction. And they lobbied Congress to allow them to cut corners and deregulate. So, the guy I'm running against takes all the Boeing money, chair of aviation, knew that there were problems with the FAA and the oversight, literally looked the other way. And what do we end up with in 2018, 2019? Two jetliners go down, almost 350 people died. That can be traced directly back to corporate lobbying of government. Like, and this is one of the major problems in our Congress right now, is that when you sit on a particular committee, the people who want to throw money at you in terms of campaign funding are the people that committee is supposed to regulate. How are you going to regulate the people who are funding your campaigns? It is a fundamental conflict of interest, and it happens across the board in Congress. It's why, so again, what is the purpose of government? Should be to ensure people's safety, to ensure that, again, people have affordable, just the basics of life, housing, food, healthcare, and education. But, all those other tangible things like product safety. And, we have seen, it seems like dozens in the last 3 or 4 months of Boeing aircraft have had these problems, like literally there was another one yesterday, literally parts falling off, right? Because the industry has been deregulated so much. There is so little regulation of that industry that the products are now, and people are like, well, Boeing's still the safest. I mean, like, do people feel confident getting on a Boeing jet right now? I know the conversation is, man, when I'm checking the flights that I'm booking, am I looking for an Airbus flight or am I looking for a Boeing flight? I guarantee I'm looking for an Airbus flight, So it's and the problem with this kind of financialization is once you lose that consumer confidence, it's bad for the industry itself. Like, Boeing is now suffering because of what they did to themselves, because they wanted to squeeze so much profit out of it. And we've got a congressman that let them do it, and not just Rick Larson, who I'm running against, but the entire transportation committee and all the people who take money from the industry, right? You're making these products less safe. You're making our food less safe. And then you end up, this is why we have a crisis of confidence in government, because government is literally not doing the job that we expect it to do, which is to ensure that we're all safe. right? And can you ensure 100% safety? No, of course you can't. But is there a clear problem when people are trying to dodge safety regulations by paying off their congressman? Of course there is, so neither party wants to address that. That's, both parties are tied to corporate money. We should have campaign finance reform. We should have public funding of elections, and neither party is getting behind that. We should have ranked choice voting. No, nobody is, neither party is going to support ranked choice voting. Why? Because it's gonna be more difficult for them to retain their office, and that's really all they want to do. They want to stay in office. Like, corporate politics is a massive gravy train if you're on the inside.
100%. And as far as your site is concerned, I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to use this last 20 minutes or so to go to your actual website. I'm going to pull it up here, and then um, call for Congress. I like that play on words. I really do.
Yeah, it's a handy last name to have.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, and you can see that, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So call for Congress. We got it here. This is Jason Call's official Congressional House site. And the urgency of your words stood out to me just looking over your site. You definitely don't hold back when it comes to.
There's no point. Like, a lot of people can't nail down a politician on what they stand for. I
Hmm.
don't know. I don't understand why. Why be vague about it? No, this is exactly what I want to do. This is exactly what I think we need to be doing in this country for the benefit of everybody.
Yeah, and see, that's even within the first paragraph here, is anyone buying this anymore? I think people are smelling the bullshit. It's just, I'm sorry, it was just so cool to see that on here. And I've had guests coming on, going for public office, and we're all about free speech here on this platform. But it's just good to see people finally letting loose and just, not holding back as much anymore. I think that's a welcoming sight. I had some questions about your labor section, just so my audience can understand what some of this stuff is. It says here sectoral union organization. What exactly does that mean?
So sectoral bargaining means that you can bargain across the country rather than one union locally bargaining. That the union sort of like take carpenters, for instance. Like, carpenters have safety standards, or they want to bargain for particular contracts. That if you can secure bargaining, like, it's like a national bargaining power, rather than a local bargaining power. Like, if it's determined that certain things are important for safety standards in Washington State, well, those safety standards should apply to West Virginia as well. So it's that kind of bargaining.
I had guests on the show previously, and I had a curious question because you talk a lot about labor, and I'm wondering, just from your vantage point, you've given some panoramic historical times as far as like politics are concerned, but I'm wondering, as far as the labor movements are concerned, why haven't we had a general strike in this country in a long time?
Because it is extremely hard to organize, and a lot of union leadership does not want to have a general strike. I think once you have a like, if a general strike was called, I think a lot of labor leaders feel like it would be more hurtful to their particular, like, labor leaders are always like, well, what is the benefit to my particular industry? We don't necessarily want to crash our industry so that then we can't have the jobs for our laborers to provide for their families and whatnot. So a general strike is very, very, very hard to organize. I mean, basically what you're saying is everybody across the country has to get on board with the same thing and say, hey, look, we're not going to work today. And while I support the concept of a general strike, I understand how difficult of a thing it is to organize. I think that's really what it is. And I think a lot of people who are like, and I think another thing is you've got to realize that a lot of labor leaders are not socialists. You know, they are very much capitalists, even though labor unions are essentially a socialist organization, like in and of itself,
Mhm.
and labor unions are socialist organizations. That the labor leaders, especially the older labor leaders, are very much tied to capitalist thinking. You know, so they don't necessarily want to hurt the industries that their labor is laboring under. You know, even though they want more for their workers, not to the point where you're actually damaging the industry.
As
Where
far
whereas a general strike is more of a like, we really need to change direction. Like our economy is dysfunctional for most people. Um, that's the direction. And I don't know that labor leaders necessarily see it in a very narrow view of their own labor union.
I had to bring this up since you're in the state of Washington, and this is something that I've also not explored much, but maybe for my audience, you could give them some important insight. Where do we have where do we find an update on the Starbucks union? Because you're in that state. Um, there was a successful attempt in Starbucks to unionize or whatever. Can you give us an update on that? Just
Um,
that's
I I actually don't really have any updates, but I will say that I was in support of Starbucks forming unions locally. I went around with a group of people from my local DSA, and we kind of fed information to Starbucks employees. Kind of walked into their business and to was the management around here, hand them a paper and say, guys, if you want to organize, we'll be with you. That kind of thing. And I think one of the problems with um, you need a strong like bargaining team. And I think when you have a lot of young workers who are like, we know we need more, like we know we're kind of getting screwed over for pay and benefits, but we don't necessarily know what to ask for in a contract. That's kind of where this strike movement sometimes peters out. In that, okay, we went on strike, okay, we formed a union. Now, how do we put together a contract and negotiate for a contract? So the whole contract negotiation part of it is different from the whole like we're going to strike and we have certain demands. And I don't know, in terms of a follow up with the Starbucks union, I don't know that the people who are organizing that more of on a national level have I don't want to be dismissive. I don't know what their contracting experience, their contract bargaining experience is, and where that stands. Like, what kind of contracts are they getting out of this, or trying to get out of this? So I don't know where the Starbucks strike movement is, but I'll still support it, just on a fundamental principle.
this jobs guarantee. I've heard a lot come up. What exactly is that? That sounds like, for me, I understand it, but for my audience, that may be more skeptical of you're going to guarantee jobs for unemployment. Like, this sounds good in the ideal world. Can you explain
So
that to those people?
So yeah, I mean, I think what the capitalist system uses unemployment as a tool, right? Capitalism kind of relies on a certain minimum level of unemployment so that they can say to workers, well, in the end, if you want a job, you're going to have to do what we tell you to do as an ownership class. Like because the bottom line is, if you don't, you're going to get a job that isn't as you go get a job that isn't as good, or you can go ahead and be unemployed and collect unemployment. And everybody knows that people don't want to be unemployed. I think most people want to work. This idea that's floating around right now that people don't want to work, you'll hear a lot of business owners
Mhm.
saying, well, people just don't want to work these days. No, people don't want to be exploited. That's what it comes down to, is people don't want to be exploited. So a jobs guarantee basically says that there are so many things that our federal government could be doing: infrastructure projects, investment in education, healthcare. People are like, well, how are you gonna, if we come, this is just the wildest argument from people who don't support universal healthcare, is like, well, our existing healthcare system couldn't absorb another 30 million people into it. And I'm like, that's your argument? That we don't
Right.
have a system that could take on another 30 million people, so we're okay with 30 million people not being able to see a doctor? How is that even an argument? So what can the federal government do? The federal government could train more doctors and more nurses and more teachers to train the doctors and the nurses. I mean, this is all like public stuff. We can build better roads. We can convert all of our buildings to energy efficient and green built, which is something that I think a lot of cities are doing, but I don't know that we're doing it on a federal level with federal buildings. I think federal buildings are really inefficient in terms of energy use right now. But there are so many things that need to be done that there's no reason that the federal government shouldn't be able to say, we're going to pay somebody a living wage to go do this infrastructure project, or we will fund your education so that then you're going to go be a doctor in your community. And if the government is the insurer, right, a single payer system means we don't have private insurance, then the government is literally employing the people in the administration for the healthcare system. The government is employing the doctors and the nurses. The government is employing the construction workers for all the municipal projects, or the scientists, or the professors, or whatever it is. Like, the federal government has vast, vast resources. Problem with our federal government right now is they want to spend half of our resources on the military so that we can go drop bombs around on people around the world, because quote unquote everything out there is a threat. Well, everything out there is not a threat. The United States is actually the threat to the rest of the world. Like, the U.S. military global hegemony and dominance is actually the biggest threat on the planet right now. We cause more instability than we solve by a long shot. So how about we do some things like, reduce the scale of our military, because our military itself should not be a jobs program. I mean, obviously the military is a huge employer, but like, are we employing people to do the right kinds of things? Let's start employing people to do the things that we actually need in this country, rather than the things that are going to be a detriment to us and the world. And the government has the resources to do that. Don't let them tell you they don't.
Yes, absolutely. I want to look at this second bullet point, and then we may go to another section before we go, because I have a few time constraints right now. But we can always bring you back on, and I'd actually prefer that, because I definitely want to have you back on. I've enjoyed this conversation, this episode 115, and I think my audience would have a great experience too if you came back on. As far as this passing the run act, I see this last section. It says requiring all businesses below 20 employees to pay them no less than two-thirds of the total profits and bonuses and dividends. I've heard people, especially like at the local level here in Tennessee. I can recall an interview I did with a candidate running for governor here, and her name is Constance Every. And we were talking about just wages and small businesses. Would this hurt small businesses? I'm going to ask that question for people
No,
who
it
would
it it
bring their
should
observations.
not. I mean, basically, we're talking about profit sharing, and basically, we're talking about veering into. So there's this argument that I want to open a business, and I'm going to hire these people, but I'm going to reap all of the rewards for the business, and I'm going to pay my employees, as little as I can possibly get away with, so that they don't just quit the job because they're not getting paid enough. But it's still a form of exploitation, because the success of any business is not dependent upon its ownership. It's dependent upon its labor force, right? So if you want a successful business, you should want to pay your employees well, and the profits that come out of that, and I know it's a very socialist, it's a very socialist mindset of how to run business. But I think, in terms of, like, there's this idea, like, if you can't afford to pay your employees so that they can live, then your business doesn't deserve to exist, right? Nobody has the right to exploit their workers. And so basically you're mandating profit sharing. Now I think a better model would be that we just undo capitalist business altogether, and all businesses should be community owned. And that's something to work towards, because anytime you have an ownership class, they're just going to work against their employees to try and squeeze as much profit as possible. And that does not sit right with me, and I don't think that it has been particularly successful as an overall model. So yeah, I mean, basically that is like forcing companies to do profit sharing.
As far as your other major principles is what I like to call them, you really touched a lot on the military industrial complex. I kind of understand, and also the healthcare aspect of it. I'm curious about the tuition free college. This comes up a lot, and I'm just if I get Chase Oliver to come back on, he's running for president as a libertarian. I really want to press him on this student debt issue because it's something like I suffer from it, and I don't know about yourself, but I'm well into student debt, just in the whole, and I don't know when it's going to be paid off anytime soon. It's just such a mess right now. I just I see it as a service myself. I've been an educator for 16 years, and I get no credit at all for educating the people. It's like you would, and then people tell me, well, it's because your degree isn't just, it's not important. So if you tell me that my PhD in Spanish isn't important, how am I able to educate the people on this channel here in particular? And they're like, wow, you interview so many different types of guests and stuff. Where do you think that comes from? From just a petty Spanish degree? There's a lot that goes into the training that I think is underestimated. And people don't realize that there's so much training that goes into this. It's not simply about how much profit is Kiko going to make once he gets this degree. That's the approach that seems to be. It's all about how much money is he going to make after he get that degree. Like, why does it always have to go to that?
And again, that's a very 1980s Reagan mindset of, that I remember, and I don't know how old you are, but I'll tell you, I'm 52 years
I'm
old.
41.
Okay, so I grew up in the era of greed is good. Like, what we talked about in high school was when we're going to make our first million. There was no thought about, are we going to go out in the world and we're going to do good? Like, yeah, we're going to do well for ourselves, but I'm going to be a doctor. Why are you going to be a doctor? Because I make a lot of money. You're like, why are you going to be a lawyer? Because I make a lot of money.
Yeah.
It wasn't that was a pervasive mentality in the 80s, and it was a very Republican geared mentality that your job is to go out there and make a lot of money. I was a huge disappointment to my father, who was a Reagan Republican, because I ended up going into education, where you just don't make a lot of money in education, and I had to take out loans. So I'm still paying back a master's degree an education that I got 20 years ago, and I did 18 years of service in public education. And I should have gotten a good deal of my loan canceled, but because of some arcane rule, and you go back and you're like, oh, read the fine print. Oh, guess you don't get yours canceled. So I'm still on the hook for around $45,000, which, by the way, the repayment system that they've got going right now with Mohila is such an absolute cluster. I have stopped paying them. I paid them on time the first 3 months that they started back up. And every time I got a notice, you're late on your payment. Your payment hasn't been credited. Why are you late on your payment? And I basically called them and said, if you guys can't figure your system out, I'm not giving you any more money. So now I'm officially 3 months behind, and I'm giving them the big middle finger, and I say, I'm not paying you guys anymore. It's ridiculous. You guys, I think 9 million of the 44 million people who had to start repaying their loans defaulted in the first month, because they're like, you're telling us we have to pay this money back. We don't have the money to pay it back. That's how bad the economy is right now. We don't have the money. Now, I could pay it back. I'm choosing not to, because I'm giving a
Hmm.
finger to the federal government for having such a screwed up system. But free college education, as you said, it's an investment. Like, education is an investment in the greater good. Like, you know, and nobody should tell you, like, you know, people are going to do, we want people to do the things that they're passionate about. I was passionate about education. I was also passionate about political science. I got a political science degree and an education degree, and I ended up being a math teacher who was active in politics. And you know, I think I've certainly done a lot of good within the public education system. I still have students from 20 years ago. I'm in contact with them, and they're like, "Yeah, you were a really great teacher. Helped me shape my worldview to the left." I'm happy to say, but you know, there is. It's like, why would you want so many people to be limited in their capacity to better themselves and to go back to their communities and make their communities better? Why would there be a price tag on that? You know, it's fundamentally flawed thinking. Like education, you know, some person that I don't know and that I will never meet, that person being educated harms me none, right? My investment in that person's education, like if it's a fraction of a penny of my tax dollars that go to educate that person, I want that. I want that person to be educated as opposed to uneducated. And I don't care what kind of education it is. Like I can't fix a car, but I certainly have to pay for somebody to fix my car. They've got an education that I don't have. That's a
Mhm.
service, right? So trade schools, not just 4-year degrees, but trade school, 4-year degrees, graduate degrees, doctors, nurses, scientists, physicists, engineers, all of this stuff, teachers, and you know, let me not leave out the arts. You know, let's
Exactly.
not leave out the fact that we should, you know, if somebody is talented in you know, playing the violin or whatever, I'm fine with having them be in school. I mean, all of these things are a general benefit. And I think the capitalist mindset is really stuck in, well, what profit are you generating to where you can justify that job? You know, and I think it's a fundamentally flawed mindset. You know, not everything, and it's the mindset that, you know, going back to the financialization of everything, including Boeing, right? It's the mindset that ends up with a less safe society for everybody, you know? So why would we limit ourselves in the capacity to educate people to whatever degree they want to be educated? You know, education's, you know, formal education is not for everybody. Some people just, you know, they're like, all right, I'm done with this stuff. I'm ready to go get a job doing what I love to do. You know, and that's fine. But the number of people that get limited in how far they can educate themselves and benefit their community just because they don't want to be saddled with debt or they can't afford the tuition, it's ridiculous. It doesn't work that way in other countries, you know. And I would even say, like, if a trade-off is like, we'll give you the education, but you got to do some civil service for it. Yeah, okay, we can talk about that. That happens in a lot of countries. I don't necessarily know what that would look like, but I don't mind some kind of trade-off if that's what satisfies the capitalists, you know,
Mhm.
that you've got to give back. But I think education, having an educated population is in itself giving back.
I love that, the explanations you gave about that issue. I just think it's a pressing issue. Um, it's a very important issue in my opinion, because it affects so many people. And if we're going to talk about, we want the brightest minds, we want people to live up to their fullest potential. Okay, so why contradict yourself saying, but if you make a certain amount of profit? I mean, it just sounds dumb. Just the whole idea is. But again, if I can get some of those people to come back on, especially some of the libertarian minded people, I definitely want to press people on that more because to me, it's just a huge disconnect. You can't financialize everything, like you said. Is basically, I mean, the healthcare industry. I mean, we see what happens when you incentivize pharmaceutical companies. You don't get good results. you get
No,
you get
no.
completely different intentions and motives and whatever.
There's this idea, this fear that has been seeded, and I think it again goes back to the Reagan era. There's this great fear that somebody is going to get something for nothing, right? Well, if you get something and you didn't have to pay for it, that means I paid for it, you
Exactly.
know? And that's why coming out of Reagan, social services got slashed, food assistance got slashed, labor unions got busted, and college tuition started to go up in the late 80s. It didn't really start to skyrocket until like 20 years ago. But you know, it started to increase. Um, but there's this great fear of people getting something for nothing. And when I think about that, and I think about, you know, like people will talk about, you know, oh, you're on welfare. Like the big thing in the 80s was welfare cheats. You know, people are skimming off the, you know, if people are skimming off the welfare system, what do you think they're getting? What are they skimming? An extra $20 a week? I mean, the amount of money that people may cheat on social services, with it pales in comparison to these corporations with armies of lawyers who are fighting actual legitimate tax liability. You know, the idea that the wealthiest corporations don't pay any taxes because they hit all the loopholes, and people aren't worried about that, but they're worried about some guy skimming, you know, a nickel here and there. I mean, it's ludicrous, and it's very classist, right? We have a very classist system. Like, we hate the poor in America. You know, there's all it's people think that, oh, well, churches do charity and we can do charity work and everybody should just do charity work. No, no, you can't count on charity work. You have to have actual structures in place to make sure that people are officially supported. Charity work doesn't cut it. I mean, charity work is nice, and it makes people feel good. But if you think, like, you know, donating to your food bank is covering people's needs, or if you think, you know, your church group doing this, that, or the other on a weekend as charity assistance is covering the need, no, it's not. You know, and part of the reason that we have such an imbalanced economy, which I want to say is, in like, vast income inequality is inherently undemocratic. You know, people who think that we've got a democratic country, when you have two people owning more wealth than the bottom 50% of people, you do not have a democracy. Like, we have rule by the very wealthy, and what do? They buy our politicians to keep those rules in place,
Mm-hmm.
and occasionally they will throw the rest of us a bone. But the reality is, the people who are buying off politicians, and they hate to say that's not, no, these are all legal. Like the guy that I'm running against, I'm like, you know what, you're bribed. Well, that's just offensive. This is the way our system works. All right, so we've got legalized bribery. All right, you know, to the fact that it's legal doesn't make it any less bribery. But the ownership class is like the their profits, the top 1%, and I don't remember if this is, I think this is globally, because it is a global problem, right? The global capitalists increased their wealth $44 trillion in the last year, or since the pandemic. Maybe it was over the last 5 years, right? $44 trillion. I forget the details of the article, but I looked at that. Like, where is that all coming from? That's coming from people's labor. You are getting that from this financialization of every industry, this profit squeezing out of every industry, and basically leaving people struggling to pay rent and struggling to buy food, and in massive student debt. That's where those exorbitant profits are coming from, and by the fact that you're not paying your taxes either. So it's we don't have a democracy. We do have an oligarchy, and unless we get money out of politics, we will remain an oligarchy. There's no way that the people who are making these vast profits off of the current system are just going to voluntarily give that up. That's not how it works. It has to be taken. We have to make the demand.
Jason Call, running for the U.S. House District, the 2nd Congressional District in the state of Washington. Callforcongress.com. I'm going to link all the information in the episode description. If you have any final words for my audience today, I just want to say I I enjoyed this conversation, this episode 115, and we can't wait to have you back on the show at a later time.
Yeah, I would love to come back sometime. My website is callforcongress.com. If you feel like you want to donate, for the international audience, you have to be an American citizen, just so you know. But I'm looking forward to this political season. I'm hoping I make it past the primary in August, and that I can go on to defeat the incumbent and be the first Green member of Congress. If anybody can do it in this election cycle, it's me. I'm running the strongest Green campaign at the congressional level in the country. It's an honor to be working for Jill Stein as her campaign manager, because I think we're going to be a real threat to the corporate duopoly in November as well.
Well, we're definitely going to be following your campaign very closely. And I know my audience is going to be excited to hear this interview in particular. And because we've already heard Dr. Stein, we also interviewed Christina Amira Khalil last
Yep.
week. And I've tried to get more Greens on because I noticed, like, wow, I really don't have anybody from the Green Party on. And I try to invite, all types of people on. That's what we do here at the forum. We really don't have, we have an ideological basis, but we don't have any discrimination when it comes to interviewing whoever we need to interview to have a good, healthy exchange of ideas.
Well, let me throw one name at you, and she is recently announced in Illinois' 13th district, which is the East St. Louis area, all the way up through Decatur, Illinois. And that is Shibu Asanye. She is a fantastic candidate, and I can forward the contact information. I'm in touch with her. In fact, the Stein campaign, we're doing an Earth Day to May Day tour. We're going to go to Atlanta. We're going to go out to East St. Louis in support of Shibu's campaign. We're going to go to St. Louis, Columbia, Missouri, which is in the center where the universities are, out to Kansas City, out to Lawrence, Kansas, University of Kansas, and up to Omaha. And all of these states are where we are petitioning for ballot access for the Green Party. So we're really happy to meet Shibu on the ground there in her district, and give her whatever support we can give to her. But I would highly recommend you have her on your show, and I'll get you her contact info.
Thank you so much, Jason. And beautiful people, I can't tell you who we have up next, but just stay tuned. We got a lot of interviews coming up. I tell you, at least 12 to close the month of April. So I almost forgot what month it was. I've been doing so many interviews. But again, please watch this 115 episode, promote it, share it with your friends and family, subscribe to Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. Doesn't cost you a dime, just a little bit of time to expand your mind. And remember, you can't unthink free thought. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, beautiful people.